Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Graves, I almost was in your district at the shipyard.
No, you were in the district, in between
I
New
passed
Orleans,
through
that's
your
right.
district.
Yeah.
Your boosterism is appreciated and correct. It really was quite an experience. And
The nice area was ours, just to be clear. So,
Admiral, thank you. Your team did a great job on the Codell that we did last weekend. The opportunity to see the fast response cutter, and then also over at Panama City. Both of them moving along. I would appreciate a report on the progress in both, particularly the latter, the offshore patrol cutter, where it stands. I noticed some of your testimony covered it, but if you could provide some detail on that in the days ahead, it would be much appreciated. Or you can give us a quick rundown now.
I'd be pleased to provide that report. And the date to keep in mind is delivery of the first ship in the year 2021.
2020 for the offshore.
2021 for the first offshore patrol cutter.
Very good. We'd want to watch that closely and monitor it along and any hiccups or slowdowns. But it was impressive to see what was going on there. The many questions. I want to just take a moment on the budget cuts. Proposed, $1.3 billion. Please give me the top 3 problems that it would create for the Coast Guard.
Well, I'd begin with the acquisition of our 9th National Security Cutter, because that would be removed. We've already awarded long lead time materials. Steel is already being cut. We would incur a contract penalty and probably would face a penalty in the amount of what this offset was designed to provide, $500 million. So there's no net savings there.
That's one.
It would cut our department's only counterterrorism capability. It has taken us the better part of 6 years using SEAL tactics training procedures, recruiting the best talent to stand up these teams, and under this proposal, we would lose that capability as well. And you don't lose these immediately. These are people, these are billets, and there's dollar figures assigned to them, and they don't leave overnight, even if you do a reduction in force. We enjoy the highest retention rate of any armed service, but our service members look to me as though I have broken faith as their leader. They look to me as their leader, nobody else, that I have broken faith with them. And then what does that do, as we heard from the Master Chief, to the men and the women of the Coast Guard and to their families, that their commandant broke faith. And I will not break faith with our people, but it does have an impact.
Okay. I want to dwell on that for just a moment. Chief, you, in a conversation, indicated that it's important to have the men and women of the Coast Guard parallel, be equal to the benefits, pays, increases in pay, other benefits that the other 4 branches of the military has. Could you comment on that?
Yes, sir, and we do. We follow suit with DOD on all pay and benefits entitlements. We are eligible for to go to their military treatment facilities and all those benefits of being an armed service. Where I get concerns is we are in a buildup of the military and we're not included in that discussion. We have a young man or young woman that's considering joining the armed service. If they look to which service, if you would, is being invested in and they don't see the United States Coast Guard, do they choose not to come to our service? And that's something that as we grow or want to grow over the next few years, that talent is out there and we're already in competition with our sister services on getting that right talent and not just recruiting them, but keeping them in our service, which is why these other housing and medical and child care and those things that some folks just don't think about that will make them leave our service, and we certainly don't want that. But we want to be part of that buildup, sir.
Okay. I want to come back to that, and the chairman mentioned the hearing next week with the 4 other services. Perhaps it's that, Admiral, you need to be invited. So maybe we can do some of that.
And if I can, Ranking Member, right now our ice-breaking program, to recapitalize that, is being funded by the Department of Defense. The Coast Guard is at every COCOM. Every geographic combatant commander has Coast Guard forces chopped to it as well. And so, yes, we do need to be a part of these discussions if we're talking about building the force for the 21st century.
When Secretary Kelly was the commander of Southcom, he seemed to think that the Coast Guard was really important. But yet it is his budget that takes $1.3 billion out of your budget. I suspect well, let's hope he still thinks that the Coast Guard's important. Didn't he say that the southwest border is 1,500 miles south of the United States border?
If we talk all borders, our maritime borders begin well south and well beyond, and actually east and west as well, thousands of miles.
If you are interdicting drugs off the coast of Colombia, what impact does that have in the Guatemala, Honduras area with regard to immigration from those countries into the United States? Is there an impact?
So it's insidious the way this works. Colombia, the #1 producer of cocaine. I met with President Santos 3 weeks ago. Can they cut back coca production? Can they step up their efforts? It's moved in bulk to Central America. And as soon as it lands in bulk in Central America, corruption goes up, rule of law goes down, and those who can afford a human trafficker will put their young children in a human trafficker to get them into the United States, the #1 consumer of cocaine. So the irony is it is our consumption that drives the shipment that creates this violent situation in Central America, and yet now people want to migrate to the United States. So this is this is as much about behavioral health as it is about law enforcement interdiction. It needs to be a campaign, and we need to tackle both of these.
We're going to need to make an argument that a wall on the Mexican border isn't going to stop immigration or the drug issue. It's going to have to be a multiple program, including the Coast Guard in that. We'll make that argument a little later. I do want to go to the maritime, excuse me, not the maritime, but Mr. Salzman. Last week we had a hearing on the Armed Services Committee with General McDew. I believe you're familiar with his testimony in which he spoke to the issue of the the real problem that exists today in the lack of mariners and the lack of ships, both the Ready Reserve as well as the MSP. You touched upon that. Is there a solution?
Congressman Garamendi, thank you for raising that important issue. Short answer is yes, there is. And I would also say that there is no daylight between us and the U.S. Transportation Command on this issue. In many respects, the Maritime Administration serves as a component command of the U.S. Transcom in providing 46 of the 61 vessels that they need out of the surge fleet.
We are aging out both the ships, the Ready Reserve ships, as well as the sailors on those ships. What do you suggest we do about that?
Well, Congressman, we have as I mentioned in my testimony, the Maritime Administration is responsible to Congress to come back with a list of options. And we owe it to our new political leadership team as they come on board to vet those options to determine what the recommendations would be. So I cannot speak to our recommendations, but I can speak broadly to what the range of options are. The policy that we have followed for years in the United States is that we rely on the commercial U.S. merchant marine to employ and train enough mariners to serve on both those commercial vessels, but also to generate a surplus that we use on the federal vessels to meet our sea lift requirements. The challenge that we have today is that the U.S. commercial fleet is no longer large enough to provide both of those needs. So the one of the two ways forward is logically to increase the size of the U.S. commercial fleet. From my testimony, just by doing the numbers, we estimate we're short about 2,000 of these qualified mariners. You need about 45 additional vessels to do that. So anything that would add those 45 vessels. The two ways that would do that, one, of course, is the expansion of an MSP or an MSP-like program where we include vessels not just for their military capability, but for their ability to serve in commerce, but also to employ enough mariners so that that pool is large enough to meet our national security needs. The second way, which would not involve a direct subsidy or direct stipend to the vessels, would be trade policies that would require additional U.S. flag vessels, whether they're carrying exports, as the bill that you and Chairman Hunter have proposed, or bilateral agreements, as for example with China, would require a certain number of vessels to sail under the U.S. flag. If you take those approach, you could also either reduce or eliminate the shortfall of U.S. flag vessels. So that's one broad category of increasing the size of the U.S. flag fleet. The second category would be to divorce the need for mariners from the requirement that the U.S. flag fleet be large enough to employ them. And then the most direct and obvious approach towards that would be to have the United States Navy or the Maritime Administration employ the additional mariners that were needed. So right now, we rely on the commercial fleet to provide a surplus of 1,300 mariners that we need to draw on within 4 days, within 96 hours of a full sea lift activation. The way to divorce that is to say to the Navy or to MARAD, here are the funds for you to employ 1,300 additional mariners, plus the relief crews that you would need going forward in a sea lift. So there are many sub-options and variations within that, but broadly speaking, those are the options before us to address a mariner shortfall and still rely on the U.S. flag fleet and U.S. mariners to meet our national security needs.
Mr. Chairman, I've gone way over my time, so please excuse me. I'm just going to wrap it up here very quickly. I would request that General McDow's statement from last week's hearing be entered into our hearing record as it pertains directly to this need for American mariners, both for the Ready Reserve Fleet as well as for the MSP. So that would be helpful to understand it. Also, I draw the attention of the committee to one of the solutions that Mr. Salzbot, I said that incorrectly. My apologies, sir. Sabat spoke to, and that is to increase the size of the American merchant marine fleet. And I have some ideas on that, and I've shared that with many of the members already. And that has to do with cargo, and it has to do with trade negotiations. And, for example, if we're going to export a strategic American resource, such as natural gas and oil, it ought to be on American-built ships with American sailors, thus providing a solution to the overarching problem at hand here. With that, Mr. Chairman, thank you for the additional time.
Thank the ranking member.